And now on Radio Calibrate, Jansen Bennetts interviews Ginsberg, Kerouac, Corso, Burroughs, names etched into the history of 20th century American letters. But to that illustrious canon could also be added the name Jeremiah Thornton, Konigsflipsenburgenspurgenmeister. Often disregarded in historical accounts of the period, Jeremiah Thornton Konigsflipsenburgenspurgenmeister was nevertheless considered by some to be fundamental to the story of 20th century gibberish poems. Today we talk to Jeremiah Thornton Konigsflipsenburgenspurgenmeister about his life, his art, and his legacy.
As I wandered, lonely, down the precinct, I thought to myself, what is it? Is it as delicate as a lotus flower? As tough as a sow's ear, my scrotum, balls, penis, dangling like two cherries in a blossoming orchard. Apartment blocks, dirty socks, lonely as a crow. I don't know which way to turn. At night, sometimes I pray to the moon. I see things through the eyes of tomorrow, hurling, curling, spinning like a sparrow. Daisies, flowers, victory is ours, yours, theirs. But who will stop the warheads blowing up our kids' faces and arms?
Despite being considered quintessentially a city poet, you were actually born in Tuscan Pimlico, Arizona, a small hamlet of no more than 3 people. Could you tell us, what was your upbringing like?
Sure. I mean, my upbringing was much like any other small town backwood farmhand brought up in a family of one. The streets were paved with cotton, and it didn't stop me dreaming.
I've heard that you have a very close relationship with your mother. Is that correct?
It started from the moment I passed through her vagina, and I never really left that place. Unfortunately, I killed her in 1946.
And how old were you then?
I was 11.
I understand that at a certain point you realised that your mother, the woman you considered to be your natural mother, actually was your grandmother. Is that correct?
That's true. My biological mother, who we'll call mother, was in fact my grandmother, due to a very honest communication breakdown between my father and his mother-in-law.
And I understand that many years later, in the 70s, you came to actually meet your actual mother. Is that correct?
I did. I'll never forget the moment. It was my first gallery opening. She just walked up to me and said, Jeremiah, I'm your mother. And I said, no, you're not. I fucking killed you. And she said, no, I'm your mother. And she produced the paperwork, and I could almost tell the first time I saw her. I could smell it. I could smell that this was indeed my mother.
Oh, really? What did she smell like?
Lemons. Lemons and incest.
Your earliest poems, I understand, have never been self-published, but apparently I was told you brought some in for us today. Would you mind reading us some?
I brought in, this is actually the first poem that I ever wrote, the one I recited for my grandmother. It's called My Shoes, My Shiny Shoes, My Shiny Little Shoes. Pooh, pooh, on my toy tractor. Yesterday I ate a snail. Daddy looming in the barn, stiff as a rod and twice as hairy. Scary. Running.
Wow, that's absolutely marvellous. Thank you very much for bringing that in.
Thank you.
After you were released from the juvenile institution in which you were incarcerated, you moved to New York City in 1953. After being brought up in such a rural environment, was moving to the city a shock to you in some way?
The sights, the sounds, the smells, the thriving community of artists, filmmakers janitors, litter pickers, just everyone working together to make that city hum.
I believe it was around this period you first encountered the Beats, is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you perhaps tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I remember the first time I encountered the Beats. I took a job in a little cafe, and outside there was a huddle of people around this bedraggled, bearded figure, and I ran outside and I noticed, and I listened to this guy speak, and it was like the second coming of Jesus. This guy just spoke, and his disciples would just listen, lapping up every word like a hungry dog. And that's when I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, this guy who clearly was about to assassinate Allen Ginsberg. And I thought, I can't let this happen. I can't let the spokesperson of the generation.
This is the infamous incident Kerouac wrote about in his poem, the non-assassination of Gin.
Yeah,
is that right?
That's correct. There's a lot of speculation about whether or not, this guy was going to assassinate Ginsberg. A lot of the onlookers to the ensuing chaos have, since said that this was just simply a local hobo who was waving a salami he'd stolen. And to some extent that's true, but he was a hobo with fire in his eyes.
It's around this time, though, the time that we're talking about, that you wrote your most, might I say, infamous poem? 17 plaster of Paris statues on a peppercorn tray. This is in 1961. It was as a result of your Greenwich Village experience, I understand. So can you tell us directly what inspired you to write this poem?
I remember writing the poem. At the time, it was very difficult for people like me. I'd had a long night, things were kind of crazy back then, and I had about 25 grams of wine gums, my Jada, and I just started drawing pictures of my asshole, and I didn't stop. And I remember staring at this wall spattered with excrement and these pictures, and just thought, now's the time to write my masterpiece. And that's it.
Would you care to share some of that poem with us this evening? We'd be very honoured if you did.
Yeah, I'll read it first now. Let's see. It's quite long.
So we're very honoured right now to have Jeremiah Thornton, Konigsflipsenburgenspurgenmeister, reading for us from his 1961 masterpiece, 17 plaster of Paris statues on a peppercorn tray.
Smashed, broken, looking inside, condiments, reflections, society, rockets, lemons, lots of lemons. Everywhere I turn, things burn, and the mold gets thicker, stronger, longer, chasing, racing, words flowing, tumbling, like orchards, orchids, acorns, peppercorns.
In the 1980s, the early 1980s, when you were approaching your...
Tony Hadley!
As you were approaching your 6th decade, I believe, you became very close friends with Tony Hadley from of the very popular group Spandau Ballet, who inspired you to actually turn some of your poetry into musical ballads. And so we're running out of time here, but I was just wondering if you could perhaps sing us one of your compositions from that period. Would that be okay? I don't want to put you on the spot or anything.
No, that's absolutely fine. I mean, Tony and I, Tony introduced me to two things. The Magimix, which is fantastic for blending food, and yacht rock. His unique take on the power ballad was quite inspiring to me, and I remember the first piece of work we produced together, which I'll perform for you tonight, which was called Lonely Little Cloud. cumulus nimbus, floating on the horizon. Lonely little cloud, cumulus stratus. Will I ever touch the horizon again?